Hello there. In this video, I'm going to be installing this Tremol-No unit into my Strandberg Boden Prog NX-7 or NX-7 Prog, whatever it is, this thing. And the reason why I'm installing it in this guitar is because there's been a lot of music that I've been playing in drop D lately. One band in particular called the Helix Nebula. If you like instrumental progressive metal, absolutely amazing. I'll link them in the description if you want to check them out. So I've been trying to learn their songs, which are all played in drop D. I do have a couple other guitars that I could drop tune. I have a Viper 1000, which is a fixed bridged guitar. And I also have Ibanez S Prestige with the DD tuner and that, I forgot what it's called, but basically the knob on the spring system on the back where you can adjust it on the fly. But ever since I got this Strandberg guitar, every time I try to play one of my other guitars, I want to pick this one back up again. But instead of going to buy another Strandberg with a fixed bridge, this is a $70 solution that allows me to turn this essentially into a fixed bridge guitar. So yeah, that's my reason. But regardless, this is pretty much the same procedure that you'd go through with any guitar, with the exception of blocks that aren't curved and require the pin type, but it's still essentially the same thing. I can go through how to do the pin type real quick at the end. So right here is the Tremol-No kit. This is the small clamp version. I purchased this from Amazon. This version is made for Floyd Rose style blocks, which are square and about 8 millimeters in width. I'm going to be installing this today on my Strandberg NX-7, but the instructions are relatively the same for any guitar. So the Tremol-No is distributed by a company called All Parts. They have it listed on their website for $99. It's usually $30 cheaper on Amazon. As of the making of this video, it's $69 giggity. So if you want to support the channel, you can use the link below to buy it from Amazon. Inside the product card here are the universal instructions to install it on basically any guitar. Some guitars have some special caveats, but this is basically all you need to know. This is the Tremol-No unit itself. We have this very nice upgraded aluminum claw, and then this sliding arm that slides back and forth on this rod and has the clamp that will attach to your block on the end of it. This comes completely off. And then this part they call the deep C. I'm not really sure why, but this is essentially what braces that sliding arm when you have it in drop mode. So basically this is the stop that holds your spring tension and doesn't allow the guitar to detune when you're using the drop mode. This is the ground screw. You're just going to wrap your ground wire around that and then tighten it down. Then there's these two set screws, and those basically brace the Tremol-No against the claw screws to prevent it from moving after you have it all set up. So that's the actual unit, and then you have some other stuff in here. So we have an extra set screws, and we have an extra thumb knob screw. And then we also have these shims. So you probably won't have to use the shims. What they're for is if you're in a situation where your block happens to sit lower than the claw, you could get binding because the unit's not sitting straight. So if you get bindings, what the shims are for is you would put them between your block and the clamp up inside, like the top of the clamp there, and on top of the block. And that would essentially lift up the arm so that it was straight and then stop that binding. So I don't think most guitars have this issue, but it is nice that they include it in the kit in case you do. It is a universal kit after all. You also get some hex wrenches. I think it's a 2 millimeter and a 1.5 millimeter. And this will basically cover all of the hex bolts that are included on the unit itself. So also great that they include these because not too common, though you might have them for the guitar work. You'll also need a Phillips head number 2 screwdriver for the claw screws. You'll need some masking tape. Painter's tape works. This is actually modeling tape that I'm using. You want something that's not going to leave behind residue, basically. Another nice to have is a pick. It's like an automotive pick, which I'm basically using to pull the springs. The springs on this guitar are pretty heavy, So it's much easier to pull the springs with this pick and get some leverage on them. If you happen to have a soldering iron, that'll also come in handy to desolder the ground wire from the claw. You can just cut it off. You don't really need a soldering iron. You don't have to go and buy one just to do this job. But if you have one, why not use it? Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is expose your trem cavity. Strandbergs usually don't have trem covers for some reason. I actually designed this one myself on a CAD program and then 3D printed it. Pretty cool, I know. You'll want to use the masking tape to mark where the front of your claw is, not the back. I've seen that in other videos. The claw is not the same size. You want to mark where the springs are, the front. So you can put one side down and then kind of move the other side back and forth until you have it straight. Make sure you're looking over the top of the guitar to have this exactly straight. Then you'll need to remove the tape from the middle so you actually have room to work. Later on, we can just lay a straight edge across the tape to actually line up where the new claw will be. So you can remove this and then worry about actually lining it up later. We have the reference marks. The instructions don't explicitly say you have to loosen the strings to do this job, but a Strandberg floating bridge isn't bolted on. It's just kind of sitting there, literally floating on a pivot. So I would definitely loosen the strings for Strandberg guitars. Now that your strings are loosened, you can grab the spring towards the top and pull it straight up towards the neck, and it should pop right off the claw. If you have a bolted on bridge and you didn't loosen your strings, you can grab your trem bar and pull the trem bar away from the guitar so that the spring distance is shortened, and that'll make it easier to pop them off. So go ahead and grab your Phillips head screwdriver. We're going to remove the two claw screws here. And just be careful removing them. They are wood screws screwed directly into the wooden body of your guitar. Okay, so we got those out. Does it matter which screw goes where? Not really. They're both the same exact screw. But OCD matters to me, so I'll just orientate them where they go on the mat there, with the top one on the top, the bottom one on the bottom. So I know which one came from where, so I can put them back in the same way. And that's it. Now our claw is released, but it's still attached to the ground wire here. So fire up your soldering iron now if you have it. And if you don't have a soldering iron, remember you can just cut it off the claw plate with wire cutters. But I'm glad I have the soldering iron. For some reason, Strandberg didn't give a lot of slack with this wire, considering how much this guitar is, which is not surprising, but you know. So there we go, just soldered it, and now the wire is free. So now we can begin installing the Tremol-No unit. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that the set screws for the claw screws are not obstructing the path of the hole where the claw screws have to go through. You can see on this side it's actually obstructing the path. You might be able to see it on the camera, but if not, I assure you it was obstructing it. So I'm backing it off until I don't see the set screw in the hole anymore. And now that looks good. Let's just make sure the other side is not obstructing either. All right, so that looks good now. So next we're just going to place the claw right into the cavity. All right, so let's reinstall our claw screws. Reinstalling the screw, you need to be very careful, because if you cross thread it in the guitar body, you're going to make a big mess that needs to be repaired. Yeah, that's not going to be fun. So I could show you a trick that you could do with any screws, machine screws, wood screws. But what you want to do is go backwards first, like counterclockwise. And what you want to do is keep going backwards until you feel the screw kind of pop and drop. You can see right here, see that drop? That means that you're in the threads and you know you're not going to cross thread it. You're in the beginning of the threads when it pops in like that. So yeah, just a trick that you can use to make sure you don't destroy your threads and have to get it professionally fixed, or start messing with wood glue and sawdust and toothpicks or whatever other tricks people use to repair mangled holes. And again, do the same thing on this side. Make sure that you're in there. I'm going to go counterclockwise first. You can see it a little better on this one when it pops in. Right there, you can see it pop down. You know you're in the threads. So now you can pull the claw to the front of the screws. It's easier if you just grab that rod and pull it forward. And you kind of want to roughly get it lined up with your tape here. And if you lay down your tape correctly, what you're going for here is to line the front of the claw up with the front edge of the tape there. So here I'm just using this little metal ruler to make sure that the claws are lined up with the tape. I was pretty spot on. I just had to make a little bit of an adjustment here to pull it out a little more, and it should be good to go. Apologies for my huge head in the way. It's kind of hard to see that it's lined up without looking over the top of the guitar. So this looks good. The next thing we're going to do is put the springs back onto the claw. I originally intended to just pull the springs and get them onto the claw, but it was kind of tough to do. So I actually had to undo the set screws that hold the springs in to kind of take them out. Attach the loop to the claw first, and then I used that pick tool I showed you earlier to pull the spring post and get it back into the block, which was much easier to do. And I recommend doing it that way if you can't pull your springs. This, again, is a 7-string guitar, so the springs are pretty heavy. The set screws for the spring are 1.5 millimeter. So the hex wrench that comes with the kit actually fits in there, so you don't have to go dig out your Strandberg one. You might have a different size if you have a different guitar with the locks there. And you can see I'm using that pick tool again to pull the post and get it back in the block. And there we go. We got the claw reinstalled and the springs attached, and now the most intimidating part of this job is over. Congratulations. The next thing you want to do is tighten down the claw set screws, the claw screw set screws. Tighten them all the way until they're snug. You don't really want to crank down on them, just until they're snug. And after you get them snug, we're going to back off half a turn. And this is just so we can do some fine adjustments, and then later on, when we get everything all settled, we'll come back and make them snug again. So now's a good time to tune the guitar and get the tension back on the springs. So I'm going to tune it up real quick, and I'll be right back. All right, so it's tuned up, and we need to attach the ground wire to the ground screw there. So for some reason, the Strandberg, they don't give you much slack. I don't have enough slack to actually wrap the wire around the screw like I originally intended to. But because I desoldered it, there's like a big bulbous piece of solder on the end of this wire. So what I'm going to do is basically just stick that behind the screw. And when I screw that down, it's going to crush the solder, and basically it's not going to go anywhere because it's going to be under pressure from crushing that solder. Ideally, what you'd want to do is expose more wire, kind of make a hook, and hook that around the actual screw and then screw that in. Even better if you can tin the end of it and then make a hook, but not exactly necessary. Hopefully you have more slack than I do to do that. For some reason, Strandberg was cheap with the wire. There may be more wire in the electronics compartment that's just like bundled up or something. I haven't checked, but this is all I have right now. So, but like I said, once that piece of solder gets crushed into the screw, it's not going to be going anywhere. And I'll show you guys a close-up of that later. Yeah, so that solder's clamped down really tight under the screw, and that's not going anywhere. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm pretty happy with that situation. Also, if you have those set screws on your spring posts, remember to tighten those before you finish this job. All right, so grab that sliding arm with the clamp on the end of it. We're going to get that on here now. And what we want to do is use the 1.5 millimeter hex wrench to loosen the clamp. And as you loosen it, just stick your finger between the clamp so that it opens up faster. Once you get that open enough to slide over the block, you can see I'm testing it here and it fits. So now you want to slide the arm onto the rod, make sure your thumb screws are opened up, and place it on the block. You'll notice that on the block it'll move, it can move left to right, and you really need to get it as straight as possible so that the rod doesn't bind. You can tighten it a little bit and then kind of pull up on your trem bar and push down to make sure that it's not binding before you tighten it all the way. And then go ahead and tighten the screw. You want to make sure that you just make this snug. These are very small screws. They'll strip or snap very easily. So you don't have to really crank down on this. Just want to get it so that it's snug and it won't be going anywhere. All right, so this is starting to feel tight now. We're almost there. I'm just going to go and check one more time. Make sure we're as snug as we need to be. And this should be good to go. Yeah, that's fine. So now that we have it tightened up, I'm just going to actuate the trem block a little bit. And I don't feel any binding. So that's great. So now's a good time to actually grab your trem bar if you don't have it on already, and to actually go through the whole range of motion of the block to make sure that you don't have any binding at any point. In this mode where everything loosens, it should feel like the Tremol-No is not even on the guitar. So if you do feel binding, then you kind of have to figure out if the binding's like Z-axis binding. You'd have to place one of those, the correct size shim under the clamp to get the binding to stop. And if it's XY axis binding, you'll either need to adjust your clamp left to right or adjust your claw screws, which is probably easier to use the claw screws because it'll be a very minute adjustment to get the arm to get unbound. Let's see if my cover actually still fits. Yep, it fits. That's great. I don't have to redesign it. And now you're almost done. All you have to do is retighten those claw screw set screws. Remember, before we tighten them down, then loosen them a half a turn. So you just have to put that half a turn back onto the screws. Make sure they're just snug. Again, don't go crazy tightening these down. And yeah, that's it. It's installed. All right, so here's a close-up of what it looks like installed. If you have the clamp version, it should look like this, the large clamp with a small clamp. And here is how I attached my ground wire. Like I was talking about before, I didn't have any slack on the wire. I tried to pull some more out and there was no give. So there's this bulbous piece of solder that was on the end after I desoldered it. And I kind of just tightened the bolt down pretty tight and crushed that solder onto the bolt. And it's not going anywhere. So I'm just going to run down the 3 modes that you can get with the Tremol-No. This is free mode. So basically this acts like the Tremol-No is not on the guitar. You can pull your trem bar up, you can push it down, and it should act as if the Tremol-No is not there at all. So I'm pushing the bar down and I'm pulling the bar up. And you can see there's no interference from the Tremol-No. Next is dive mode or drop mode. You need to take the deep C. Sorry, I'm trying to hold the guitar up in one hand and do this. So you need to take the deep C and slide it forward into the sliding arm. and you want to make sure it's flush. Like you want to kind of push against it to make sure it's flush against the arm, because this is what's going to be bracing the arm on the comeback. So push it up, make sure it's contacting, and then tighten it down. You don't want to go crazy, but you want to make it, finger tight as much as you can. And there it is. So now you can see when I push down on the bar, you can push down as in a dive, but when I'm trying to pull up, so I'm trying to pull up right now, it doesn't move. And because this can't move back, this is what holds your tune, because it's holding the block in place. So if I tune my E to D or my B to A, even though technically this string tension would be less, and that usually would collapse the springs and cause the block to fall towards the claw a little more, that doesn't happen because the block is statically held in place by that deep C, and it doesn't allow it to move back any further. And the last mode is like full lockdown mode. So to do that, you just tighten these two thumb screws, tighten them down like as much as you did with the deep C, and now this sliding arm can no longer slide along that rod. So essentially your bridge is fixed. So I'm pushing down my trem bar, I'm pulling up on the trem bar, and you can see that there's absolutely no movement at all. The block is statically fixed in place either way. So, and just one more observation here. When you tighten these down, you don't have to keep them loose because they will fall out from the vibration. There's like a O-ring sealing these. So when you tighten them down, but you don't want to lock it down, just tighten it. You can hear that noise. That's when it makes contact. So tighten it so you kind of hear that noise, and then back it off a little bit, and you can hear there's no more noise. And this is still pretty tight, so it won't fall out. All right, so the main reasons for installing this, if you want to play in drop tuning, is so that the rest of your guitar doesn't go out of tune when you go into drop tuning without messing with the floating bridge. So you can see here my guitar is currently in tune. Okay, this is a 7-string, if you ever figure that out. This should be within 3 cents. So let's go to drop D tuning. There you go. Guitar's still in tune. We're in drop D. And yeah, so it works. Alright, so if you plan on buying this, there are 3 versions, so make sure you buy the correct version for your guitar. The one we installed in the video is the small clamp version here. This is for Floyd Rose style blocks that are a max of 8 millimeters in depth and are squared off. Anything more than 8 millimeters, you're going to go with the large clamp, which is basically the same thing, it's just larger depth. And then there's the pin type. So the large clamp is going to install the same exact way, it's just a larger block. The pin type installs a little differently when you attach the clamp to the block, because these blocks are curved. So if you have a curved block or a chamfered block, you need the pin type. And how that works is you're going to loosen it up the same way we loosen the clamp with the bolt here. And then you're going to take this pin and insert it into one of the holes here, wherever it falls when you're installing it. And then there's this flat edge opposite the pin that's going to rest against the back of the block here. And then when you tighten the bolt, it's basically going to cause a clamping action between that inserted pin and the back of the block, and that's how that stays in place. And that's the only difference in installing the pin version. So everything else basically the same. And that about wraps it up. If you plan on installing the Tremol-No, let me know in the comments which guitar that you plan to install it on. If you plan on buying it, consider using the link in the description. It supports the channel at no extra cost to you. If you found this video useful, hit that like button. Consider subscribing for future content. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.